The thin, high-pitched keening, more animal than human, sliced through the manufactured tranquility of Willow Creek Estates with the razored edge of pure, unadulterated agony. It was a sound that stopped Dr. Evelyn Hayes mid-sentence, her hand freezing on the garden gate of her sister's meticulously kept suburban home. Evelyn, Chief State Emergency Medical Officer, a woman whose ears were calibrated to discern the subtle nuances of distress from across a crowded ER or through the crackle of a paramedic's radio, knew that sound. It wasn't a child's tantrum, nor the playful shriek of a game gone slightly awry. It was the signature of unendurable pain, of a body betraying its occupant, a desperate SOS signal fired into the indifferent afternoon air. What in God's name was that her sister Carol murmured, her brow furrowing as she looked up from her prize-winning roses? Evelyn was already moving her physician's instincts, overriding the social pleasantries of her rare day off. "That's a medical crisis, Carol. Sounds like a child." "Which direction?" Her voice was calm, but with an undercurrent of urgency that made Carol point instantly towards the main boulevard of the sprawling HOA community. "Down there, I think, near the West Gate." "Oh, Evelyn, I hope it's nothing serious." But Evelyn knew with a chilling certainty that settled in her gut that it was already serious. That kind of vocalization spoke of neurological compromise or pain so overwhelming it bypassed coherent speech. She broke into a run, her comfortable loafers slapping against the pristine asphalt, her mind already cycling through differential diagnoses, a habit ingrained from decades in the crucible of emergency medicine. As she rounded a bend, shaded by perfectly spaced willow trees, the scene that slammed into her view made her blood run cold, a nauseating cocktail of fury and disbelief churning within her. Two uniformed HOA security guards, burly and officious, in their crisp, police-style attire, were physically blocking a frantic woman from getting into her car. In the woman's arms was a child, a boy of perhaps 10, whose body was contorted in what looked like a severe seizure, his limbs flailing, his head thrown back, that terrible keening still ripping from his throat. The mother, her face a mask of desperate terror, was pleading with the guards, trying to push past them. "Please, you don't understand. He needs to get to the hospital." "Now, it's Leo. He has Dravet syndrome. This is a status seizure. Every minute counts," she screamed, her voice cracking with anguish. One of the guards, older with a name tag reading Dean, held up a placating but firm hand, his expression a mixture of impatience and condescension. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but you were reported for reckless driving within the community. We need to follow procedure here. We've called our supervisor. You need to remain calm." "Calm?" The woman shrieked, her eyes wild. "My son is dying and you're talking about a driving complaint. Are you insane? Let me go." She tried to shoulder past him again, but the second younger guard moved to block her path more firmly. Leo let out another piercing cry, his small body jerking violently. Evelyn could see the cyanotic tinge beginning to creep around his lips. He was rapidly losing oxygen. This wasn't just incompetence. This was an active, catastrophic obstruction of emergency medical care. Evelyn Hayes, the woman responsible for the entire state's emergency medical response system, felt a surge of adrenaline so potent it was almost painful. "Let her through," Evelyn's voice, honed by years of commanding chaotic ERs and addressing legislative committees, cut through the air like a scalpel, sharp, clear, and utterly authoritative. "That child is in status epilepticus. He needs immediate advanced life support and transport. Get out of her way now." Both guards and the distraught mother turned in surprise. Evelyn was dressed casually in slacks and a blouse, looking like any other visitor to Willow Creek. Officer Dean frowned, clearly annoyed by this new interference. "And who are you, ma'am? This is an official HOA matter. We're handling it." Evelyn didn't waste time on introductions or arguments about jurisdiction. She was already moving towards the mother and child, her eyes assessing Leo's condition with a speed and precision that was breathtaking. "I'm a doctor," she said, her tone leaving no room for doubt. To the mother, she said, "What's his emergency medication protocol? Does he have rectal diazepam blow-by oxygen?" The mother, Clara, looked at Evelyn with a dawning flicker of desperate hope in her tear-filled eyes. "Yes, Valium in his bag in the car. No oxygen here. The hospital he needs, the hospital protocol he's already been seizing for nearly 10 minutes by the time they stopped me." Her voice choked on a sob. 10 minutes. Brain cells were dying. These men are obstructing emergency medical care for a minor, a felony. In this state, Evelyn announced her gaze, locking onto Officer Dean's, cold and hard as granite. You are to step aside immediately and allow this mother to transport her child, or alternatively, you will call 911 for paramedic intercept this instant and then get out of the way. If that child suffers further harm due to your delay, you will be held personally and criminally liable. Make your choice. You have 5 seconds. She pulled out her state-issued credentials, flipping open the leather wallet to display the gold badge and the formal identification, Dr. Evelyn Hayes, Chief Medical Officer, State Department of Emergency Services. The color drained from Officer Dean's face. The younger guard looked terrified. They had been power tripping, enforcing petty HOA rules, and had just run headfirst into the highest emergency medical authority in the state. Evelyn didn't wait for their decision. She was already helping Clara get Leo into the car, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, checking his airway barking instructions. Carol, she yelled towards her sister, who had arrived breathless and horrified, call 911. Tell them pediatric status epilepticus probable drevet requesting immediate paramedic intercept Willow Creek Estates West Gate. Tell them Dr. Hayes is on scene and to expedite. Go. The carefully manicured, rule-obsessed tranquility of Willow Creek Estates had just become ground zero for a medical emergency and a major jurisdictional showdown. And Evelyn Hayes was in the eye of the storm. Her quiet day off irrevocably shattered her professional and personal worlds, colliding with terrifying force. The fight for Leo's life and the fight against the lethal stupidity that had endangered him had just begun. Dr. Evelyn Hayes was a woman forged in the relentless fires of emergency rooms, a place where life and death danced a constant brutal tango. She'd seen humanity at its most vulnerable, its most resilient, and sometimes its most tragically foolish. Her ascent to Chief State Emergency Medical Officer had been a natural progression, a recognition of her clinical brilliance, her calm leadership under unimaginable pressure, and her unwavering advocacy for patients. She was a systems thinker dedicated to improving not just individual outcomes, but the entire chain of survival from bystander CPR to sophisticated critical care transport. Her days were now usually filled with policy meetings, budget battles, interagency coordination, and the endless, often frustrating bureaucracy of state government. But the clinician in her, the healer, was never far from the surface. She still picked up occasional shifts in a busy urban ER just to keep her skills sharp, to stay connected to the front lines, to remember why she fought so hard in those sterile committee rooms. Willow Creek Estates was the epitome of the kind of managed insular community that often viewed itself as separate from and perhaps superior to the messier realities of the outside world. With its winding streets, its identical earth-toned McMansions, its private golf course, and its legion of HOA rules, governing everything from lawn height to the precise shade of beige one could paint their mailbox, it projected an image of affluent order. This order was maintained in part by a private security force contracted from a company called Guardian Protection Services. These guards, often ex-military or individuals with a penchant for uniforms and authority, patrolled in golf carts and SUVs, their primary function seeming to be the enforcement of HOA regulations and the maintenance of an atmosphere of exclusive tranquility. They were not paramedics. They were not by any stretch of the imagination trained medical first responders. Their understanding of a medical emergency Evelyn was about to discover was dangerously, catastrophically flawed. Leo Maxwell was 10 years old, a bright, imaginative boy who loved dinosaurs and drawing intricate maps of fantasy worlds. He also lived with Dravet syndrome, a rare and severe form of epilepsy that began in infancy. His seizures were frequent, often prolonged, and could be triggered by a myriad of factors, including illness stress or even slight temperature changes. For his mother, Clara Maxwell, a widowed graphic designer who worked from home to be available for Leo life, was a constant tightrope walk of vigilance and preparedness. She knew Leo's seizure protocols by heart, could administer emergency medications with practiced calm, and had an emergency bag packed and ready at all times. Their local hospital, Northwood General, had a specialized pediatric neurology unit familiar with Leo's complex case. Speed was always of the essence when Leo had a breakthrough seizure, especially a status seizure, one that didn't stop on its own. Minutes, literally minutes, could mean the difference between recovery and permanent brain damage, or worse. The HOA security guards, particularly Officer Frank Dean, The senior guard Evelyn had confronted operated under a set of protocols established by Guardian Protection Services and tacitly approved by the Willow Creek HOA board, led by a notoriously officious and cost-conscious manager named Alistair Finch. These protocols, Evelyn would later learn, prioritized maintaining order and controlling the scene above all else. Guards were instructed to investigate any disturbances or rule violations thoroughly, to identify all parties involved, and to await a supervisor before allowing anyone to leave a contested scene, especially if property damage or a formal complaint from another resident was involved. There was a perverse incentive to handle situations internally whenever possible, to avoid calling outside authorities like the county police or paramedics, as this reflected badly on Guardian's ability to manage the community and could lead to scrutiny or even cancellation of their lucrative contract. Medical emergencies, if they didn't fit neatly into a box of call an ambulance and step aside, were often mismanaged, downplayed, or dangerously delayed. The inciting incident, the first tremor that hinted at the earthquake to come, had occurred a few months prior. Leo had suffered a milder seizure while playing in the small community park. Clara had administered his emergency medication and as a precaution had called for an ambulance to transport him for observation, as was his neurologist's standing order after any significant seizure. The ambulance had arrived promptly, its lights flashing a necessary but brief disruption to Willow Creek's serene afternoon. Officer Dean had been the responding HOA guard. Instead of facilitating the paramedics, he had spent several minutes officiously questioning Clara about why she hadn't notified HOA security first, and then had aggressively berated the paramedic crew for blocking the roadway and causing unnecessary alarm to residents with your sirens. The paramedics professionals, focused on their patient, had ignored him, but Clara had been shaken by his callousness and his apparent prioritization of HOA rules over her son's medical needs. She had filed a complaint with Alistair Finch, the HOA manager. Finch had sent her a patronizing letter assuring her that Officer Dean was a valued member of the Guardian team and that he was merely ensuring community protocols were followed. No apology, no acknowledgement of Dean's inappropriate behavior, just a chilling dismissal. Evelyn, visiting Carol that weekend, had heard the story, and a small knot of unease had tightened in her chest. She knew how critical unimpeded access was for emergency services. This HOA's attitude was a red flag. The day Evelyn intervened, Clara had been taking Leo to a routine doctor's appointment when he suddenly cried out, his body stiffening, the telltale signs of a major seizure beginning. She'd immediately pulled over, administered his rectal Valium, and knowing this was a bad one, had turned the car around to head straight for Northwood General, which was closer than waiting for an ambulance to arrive and then transport. In her panic and haste, she had admittedly exceeded the ridiculously low 15 mph speed limit on Willow Creek's main boulevard. A resident, a notorious busybody named Mrs. Henderson, who frequently complained about unruly children and speeders, had apparently called HOA security to report a reckless driver endangering the community. Officer Dean and his younger partner, a new recruit named Miller, no relation to the previous story's Officer Miller, had responded to the call. They had intercepted Clara just as she reached the west gate, blocking her exit. When they saw Leo seizing in the car, his appearance, no doubt alarming and strange, to their untrained eyes they hadn't seen a medical emergency. They'd seen a disturbance. Clara's frantic attempts to explain her pleas for help were dismissed as hysteria. They were focused on the speeding complaint, on controlling the situation, on following their rigid, senseless protocol. They had insisted she wait for their supervisor, effectively holding her and her critically ill son hostage. They didn't call 911 themselves. They were handling it. This was the rising action, the horrifying escalation from prior insensitivity to active, life-threatening obstruction. Evelyn's arrival, her immediate recognition of the medical crisis, and her assertion of authority had shattered their little bubble of power. While Carol was on the phone with 911 dispatch, Evelyn was in Clara's car with Leo. His seizure was ongoing, his breathing shallow, his color poor. "Clara, do you have a bag valve mask?" Evelyn asked, her voice calm but rapid, already searching the emergency kit Clara kept in the car. "No, just the Valium." His neurologist said if it didn't stop it in 5 straight to ER. Clara was sobbing, fumbling with her seatbelt, her hands shaking too much to be of use. Evelyn found a small portable pulse oximeter in the kit, clipped it onto Leo's finger. The reading was terrifyingly low. "He's profoundly hypoxic," Evelyn muttered more to herself. She repositioned his head, trying to ensure a patent airway, her fingers feeling for a carotid pulse, which was rapid and thready. The keening had stopped, replaced by ominous, stertorous breathing. This was bad, very bad. The wail of approaching sirens was the most beautiful sound Evelyn had heard all day. The local paramedic crew, Engine 73, arrived with impressive speed, their response no doubt accelerated by the mention of Dr. Hayes on scene. Two paramedics, a man and a woman, rushed to the car, their expressions grimly professional as they took in the scene, the seizing child, the distraught mother, the two now very subdued-looking HOA guards, and Evelyn Hayes, who they instantly recognized. "Dr. Hayes, the lead paramedic," Mark said with a nod. "What have we got?" Evelyn gave a concise, rapid-fire report. 10-year-old male known Dravet status seizure ongoing now for approximately 15 to 17 minutes, despite rectal Valium. Profoundly hypoxic SaO2 in the low 70s. Needs immediate IV access, more benzos, probably Keprolode, and definitive airway management if he doesn't respond. Let's move, people, time is brain. The paramedics worked with swift, practiced efficiency, a whirlwind of controlled motion. They got Leo onto a stretcher, started blow-by oxygen, then quickly moved to establish an IV line in his small hand, a difficult task, with his ongoing seizure activity. Mark administered another dose of intravenous diazepam. All the while, Evelyn stood by, observing, ready to assist if needed, but allowing the highly skilled paramedics to do their job. She was impressed by their speed and competence. Her state's EMS system, for all its challenges, had some damn good people on the front lines. Officer Dean and his partner Miller hovered uncertainly in the background, now looking more like chastened schoolboys than authority figures. Evelyn shot them a look that could have frozen fire. "You two stay right there. I will be dealing with you and your employers when this child is stabilized." Her voice was soft, but laden with a promise of dire consequences. They both swallowed hard, avoiding her gaze. The IV benzodiazepines finally began to take effect. Leo's seizure activity lessened, then blessedly stopped. His breathing became less labored, his color started to improve as the high-flow oxygen did its work. He was still unconscious, postictal, but he was no longer actively seizing. A collective sigh of relief went through the small group around the ambulance. Clara was weeping openly now, tears of relief and residual terror clutching Leo's small hand. "He's stabilizing," Clara, Evelyn said, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "They've broken the seizure. Now they need to get him to Northwood, get him seen by his neurologist, make sure there are no complications." "Thank you," Clara whispered, her voice thick with emotion, looking at Evelyn with an expression of profound gratitude. "Oh God, thank you, Dr. Hayes. If you hadn't been here..." She couldn't finish the sentence, the implication hanging heavy in the air. Evelyn just nodded her own relief. Immense, but a cold anger still simmered beneath the surface. This child had come perilously close to a catastrophic outcome, not because of his underlying disease, but because of human stupidity, because of a dangerously flawed system of private security operating with impunity. As the ambulance prepared to depart, lights flashing, Evelyn turned her attention back to Officer Dean and Officer Miller. "Your names, badge numbers, and the name of your supervisor and your company." Now, she demanded, her voice devoid of any warmth. Dean, his earlier arrogance completely gone, recited the information, his voice barely a mumble. Miller looked like he was about to be sick. "I will be filing a formal complaint with every relevant state licensing board, with the district attorney's office, and with my own department regarding your actions here today," Evelyn informed them, her words precise and chilling. "Your obstruction of emergency medical care, your illegal detention of a minor in a medical crisis, and your gross incompetence have endangered a child's life. You can expect the full weight of the law to come down on you and on Guardian Protection Services and on any member of the Willow Creek HOA board who sanctioned or enabled these criminally negligent protocols. You may want to find yourselves a good lawyer. Several, in fact." She then turned and walked towards her sister's house, her mind already racing, planning her next steps. This wasn't just about punishing these two guards. This was about dismantling a system that allowed this to happen. This was about ensuring no other child, no other family, ever had to endure what Leo and Clara Maxwell had just gone through. The fight had just escalated. The immediate aftermath was a flurry of activity. Evelyn, after ensuring Carol was all right and arranging to have her car retrieved, later drove herself straight to Northwood General Hospital. She wanted to check on Leo personally and speak with his neurologist, Dr. Ramirez, an old colleague. She also wanted to secure Clara Maxwell's full detailed statement while the events were fresh in her mind, and to offer her support both as a physician and as a state official who was about to bring the hammer down. Leo was in the pediatric ICU stable, but sedated, undergoing a battery of tests to assess for any neurological damage from the prolonged seizure and hypoxia. Dr. Ramirez met Evelyn with a grim expression. "Ev, if you hadn't been there, if those damn rent-a-cops had delayed Clara even another 5 or 10 minutes, we'd be looking at a very different, much worse outcome. As it is, he's lucky. We're hopeful he'll make a full recovery, but he was on the brink." "I know, Maria. I know," Evelyn said, her voice tight. "Tell me, have you had issues with this Willow Creek HOA or their security before regarding patient access or emergency response?" Dr. Ramirez sighed. "Minor things, mostly. Complaints from ambulance crews about being hassled at the gate, delays while guards verify things. Nothing this egregious, nothing this insane. But it fits a pattern I've heard about from other private communities. They operate like little fiefdoms, their own rules, their own priorities, and medical emergencies don't always fit their neat little boxes." This confirmed Evelyn's growing suspicion that the Willow Creek incident was symptomatic of a larger systemic problem. While at the hospital, Evelyn also made several calls. One was to the State Attorney General's office, apprising them of a potential criminal investigation into Guardian Protection Services and the Willow Creek HOA. Another was to the head of the state agency responsible for licensing private security firms. She was laying the groundwork, mobilizing the state's resources. Clara Maxwell, though exhausted and emotionally drained, provided Evelyn with a coherent and damning account of her ordeal, detailing not just the events of that day, but also the previous incident with Officer Dean and the HOA's dismissive response. Her quiet anger and her determination to see justice done for Leo were palpable. Evelyn assured her that she would not be alone in this fight. The first shocking development in the rising action of the broader conflict came within days. Alistair Finch, the Willow Creek HOA manager on behalf of the HOA board and Guardian Protection Services, issued a public statement. It was a masterpiece of obfuscation and victim blaming. The statement expressed regret for any misunderstanding, but staunchly defended the actions of Officers Dean and Miller, stating they were following established community safety protocols in response to a reported reckless driving incident. It subtly implied that Mrs. Maxwell's agitated state had escalated the situation and even questioned the true severity of Leo's condition, at the time suggesting it might have been exaggerated. There was no apology, no admission of wrongdoing, just a doubling down on their own flawed narrative. Evelyn was incandescent with rage when she read it. This wasn't just a denial. It was an attack on Clara, an attempt to discredit her to protect their own culpable backsides. This was a declaration of war. She immediately convened a press conference, flanked by a visibly supportive state attorney general and the head of the private security licensing agency. In calm, measured, but devastating terms, Evelyn rebutted the HOA's statement point by point. She described in medically accurate detail the life-threatening nature of Leo's condition, the critical importance of rapid intervention, and the profound negligence of the guards' actions. She announced that her office, in conjunction with the AG, was launching a full investigation into Guardian Protection Services training protocols and past conduct, as well as the oversight or lack thereof by the Willow Creek HOA. The media seized on the story, Dr. Mom versus HOA bullies. One headline screamed, "State Med Chief slams rogue security after child's near death." The battle lines were drawn. The second shocking incident was more insidious, revealing the depths to which the HOA and Guardian were willing to sink. They began a campaign to discredit Evelyn herself. Anonymous letters filled with fabrications and innuendo were sent to the governor's office and to members of the state legislature, questioning Evelyn's emotional involvement in the case, suggesting she was abusing her office for a personal vendetta because her sister lived in Willow Creek. They even tried to dig up dirt from her long career, looking for any past complaint, any disgruntled former colleague, anything they could use to tarnish her reputation. Simultaneously, they put immense pressure on the younger guard Miller, who had been present with Dean, to change his story, to support Dean's version of events, offering him legal support and veiled promises of future employment if he cooperated. They were trying to isolate Dean as a scapegoat for the speeding stop part, while downplaying the medical obstruction, and paint Evelyn as an overreacting, biased official. Evelyn, a veteran of political hardball, was not surprised by these tactics, but she was disgusted. This was a clear attempt at intimidation and obstruction of a state investigation. It only strengthened her resolve. She knew they were desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. Her investigators, meanwhile, were digging deep into Guardian Protection Services. They were uncovering a pattern of inadequate training, particularly in recognizing and responding to medical emergencies. They found that Guardian's protocols actively discouraged guards from allowing residents to leave a scene or calling 911 directly until a Guardian supervisor had arrived and assessed the situation, a policy designed to control information and minimize external scrutiny, but one that could, and in Leo's case, did have life-threatening consequences. There were also whispers of falsified training records and a history of quickly settling minor lawsuits to avoid public exposure. The midpoint twist, the revelation that truly blew the case wide open and shifted its entire focus, came from an unexpected source, Officer Miller, the younger guard. Racked with guilt over what had happened to Leo, terrified by the strong-arm tactics of Guardian's lawyers, trying to make him perjure himself, and perhaps seeing the writing on the wall as Evelyn's investigation relentlessly tightened the noose, Miller cracked. He contacted Evelyn's office through an attorney offering to cooperate fully in exchange for immunity or a significantly reduced charge. In a secretly recorded proffer session with state investigators, Miller laid it all bare. He confirmed that Officer Dean had been overtly hostile and dismissive of Clara Maxwell's pleas from the outset. He admitted they had no medical training beyond basic CPR, and that Dean had specifically ordered him not to call 911, saying, "We handle our own problems here, kid. Don't need outsiders mucking things up and making us look bad. It's probably just a brat throwing a fit anyway." This was damning enough. But then came the bombshell. Miller revealed that Guardian Protection Services, with the knowledge and tacit approval of Alistair Finch and key members of the Willow Creek HOA board, had a specific unwritten policy to delay or, if possible, prevent calls to external emergency services, police, fire, EMS, for any incident that could reflect negatively on the HOA's image or Guardian's competence. This was especially true for disruptive medical events or anything involving problematic residents. The rationale was twofold: to avoid official reports that could impact the HOA's insurance rates or property values, and to ensure Guardian could control the narrative, presenting any incident as resolved efficiently by their own personnel. They even had a system of internal incident codes that deliberately downplayed the severity of medical situations. Miller produced internal memos and emails, which he had surreptitiously copied, that hinted at this policy. One email from a Guardian regional manager to supervisors, including Dean's direct boss, stated, "Vigilance is required to maintain the desired community atmosphere. External agency involvement should be a last resort. Resolve and report internally. Client satisfaction is paramount." This was the smoking gun. This wasn't just about a few rogue guards or inadequate training. This was a deliberate, systemic policy of prioritizing image and liability control over human life and safety. It explained Dean's egregious behavior. It implicated Finch and the HOA board in a conspiracy of silence and negligence. Evelyn now had proof of a culture that actively and potentially criminally endangered residents in the name of maintaining a facade of peaceful, problem-free exclusivity. The investigation had just escalated from negligence to potential corporate manslaughter and racketeering. The scope had widened dramatically, and the stakes were now astronomical. This was no longer just about Willow Creek. This was about every community policed by Guardian Protection Services and every HOA that enabled such dangerous practices. Evelyn knew she had to take this to the highest levels. The fight for Leo had become a crusade to protect an entire state. Armed with Officer Miller's testimony and the corroborating evidence, he provided Evelyn Hayes and the State Attorney General, Marcus Thorne, knew they had a case that could shake the foundations of private community governance and security. The unwritten policy of discouraging or delaying calls to 911 was not just negligent. It was a ticking time bomb, and Leo Maxwell had been its near-fatal detonation. Thorne, a cautious but principled prosecutor, agreed with Evelyn that this required an aggressive, multi-pronged approach. They would pursue criminal charges against individuals, but also aim for systemic reform. The public announcement of expanded criminal investigations into Guardian Protection Services corporate practices and into key members of the Willow Creek HOA board, including Alistair Finch, sent shockwaves across the state. Guardian's stock plummeted. Other HOAs contracted with Guardian began frantically reviewing their agreements and protocols. Finch, who had initially been so arrogant and dismissive, found himself the target of intense media scrutiny and public outrage. His attempts to distance himself from Guardian, to claim ignorance of their internal policies, rang hollow against the weight of Miller's evidence and the damning emails. The climax of this phase of the battle occurred not in a courtroom, but in a specially convened State Senate Oversight Committee hearing on emergency medical access in private communities. The hearing, chaired by a respected senior senator, Eleanor Vance, had been called in direct response to the Willow Creek incident and the alarming revelations from Evelyn's investigation. It was televised statewide, and the hearing room was packed with media-concerned citizens, healthcare advocates, and nervous representatives from the private security industry and HOA lobbying groups. Dr. Evelyn Hayes was the lead-off witness. Dressed in a simple dark suit, her demeanor was a compelling blend of professional authority and profound human empathy. She began by recounting in clear, concise language the events of Leo Maxwell's medical emergency, her voice steady but imbued with the gravity of the near tragedy. She then masterfully pivoted, using Leo's story as a lens through which to expose the systemic failures she had uncovered. She presented anonymized data on delayed EMS responses in communities serviced by Guardian, contrasted with response times elsewhere. She detailed the inadequacies in their training, the lack of medical oversight, and then with chilling precision, she laid out the evidence of the unwritten policy to suppress calls to 911. This policy, senators, Evelyn stated, her gaze sweeping the committee members, is not just a breach of contract or a failure of common sense. It is a reckless endangerment of human life, a cynical calculation that prioritizes a false image of tranquility and the avoidance of liability over the fundamental right of every citizen of this state to timely, unimpeded emergency medical care. When a child is seizing, when a person is having a heart attack or a stroke, minutes, even seconds matter. To deliberately interfere with or delay access to that care for any reason other than the immediate safety of the patient or providers is unconscionable, and it must be illegal. Alistair Finch was called to testify. Under oath, faced with Senator Vance's sharp, relentless questioning and the weight of the evidence Evelyn had presented, Finch crumbled. His carefully constructed composure evaporated, replaced by a sweaty, stammering defensiveness. He tried to blame rogue employees, to plead ignorance, but the emails and Miller's sworn testimony contradicted him at every turn. His credibility was shredded before a statewide audience. Next came the regional director of Guardian Protection Services. He attempted a more polished defense, speaking of isolated errors in judgment and promising internal reviews and enhanced training. But when Senator Vance confronted him with Guardian's own internal memos advocating for limiting external agency involvement and with statistics showing a pattern of delayed EMS calls from their sites, his facade cracked. He became evasive, combative, further damaging his company's already tattered reputation. The most powerful testimony, however, came from Clara Maxwell. Her voice trembling but resolute, she recounted her terrifying ordeal. Her desperate pleas ignored her son's life hanging in the balance. She spoke not just as a mother, but as a citizen demanding accountability and change. "My son Leo is alive today because Dr. Hayes happened to be there." Clara said, her eyes filling with tears, but her gaze steady. But what about the next child? The next person who has a medical emergency in a community where the people paid to protect them are instead taught to obstruct and delay? How many more near tragedies or actual tragedies will it take before we say, enough is enough? We trust these communities, these security services, with our safety, with our lives. That trust was broken for my family. It must be restored, not with empty promises, but with real enforceable laws. Her testimony was met with a rare, spontaneous ovation from the public gallery. The moral authority of her words was undeniable. By the end of the day-long hearing, it was clear that the political will for significant reform had been ignited. Senator Vance, visibly moved and angered by what she had heard announced that she would be immediately drafting legislation to address the issues raised, legislation that would later be affectionately nicknamed Leo's Law by the media. The climax had been a public reckoning, a stripping away of falsehoods, and a clear call to action. The path to justice for Leo and for safer communities across the state was now clearly illuminated. In the months that followed, the dramatic Senate hearing the legal and legislative machinery ground forward, slowly but inexorably. Officer Frank Dean, stripped of his security license and facing a barrage of criminal charges, including reckless endangerment and felony obstruction of emergency medical services, accepted a plea bargain that saw him serve significant jail time and perform extensive community service in hospitals. A stark lesson in the realities of medical emergencies he had so callously dismissed. His career in any form of security or law enforcement was over. Alastair Finch, the disgraced HOA manager, was convicted of conspiracy to obstruct justice and several lesser charges related to his complicity in the cover-up. He received a sentence that included house arrest, substantial fines, and was barred from ever holding a position of authority in any community association again. His reputation was irrevocably destroyed. Guardian Protection Services faced a corporate reckoning, hit with crippling fines from the state licensing board, facing a class action lawsuit from residents of multiple communities, and its brand now synonymous with negligence. The company was forced into a radical restructuring under the threat of having its state operational license permanently revoked. New leadership was brought in, and they entered into a stringent consent decree with the state attorney general's office, mandating a complete overhaul of their training programs to be developed in consultation with Dr. Hayes' office, strict adherence to new state laws regarding emergency protocols, and ongoing independent monitoring of their performance. Many of their lucrative HOA contracts were terminated as communities scrambled to find more reputable and responsible security providers. The Willow Creek Estates HOA also underwent a painful but necessary transformation. Finch was gone, as were the board members who had enabled his disastrous reign. A new board composed of genuinely concerned and humbled residents was elected. They issued a profound and public apology to Clara, and Leo Maxwell settled a significant civil claim with them and worked diligently with Dr. Hayes' office and other experts to implement new community safety protocols that prioritized resident well-being and ensure unimpeded access for all emergency services. The West Gate, once a symbol of obstruction, became a site of renewed vigilance for true safety. Leo Maxwell thankfully made a remarkable recovery. The prompt intervention by Evelyn and the paramedics, though delayed initially, had prevented permanent catastrophic brain damage. He returned to his love of dinosaurs, and drawing though the shadow of his ordeal lingered. Yet with the support of his fiercely loving mother, dedicated therapists, and a community now actively trying to make amends, he began to thrive. He, even with Clara's help, designed a child-friendly brochure about Dravet syndrome and how to respond in an emergency, which the new Willow Creek HOA distributed to all residents and staff. His resilience was a quiet testament to the strength of the human spirit. Dr. Evelyn Hayes, meanwhile, became the driving force behind Leo's law. She worked tirelessly with Senator Vance and a bipartisan group of legislators, navigating the complex political landscape, countering opposition from powerful lobbying groups, and ensuring the final bill was strong, comprehensive, and enforceable. The law, when it finally passed with overwhelming support and was signed by the governor, was a landmark piece of legislation. It mandated clear, unobstructed 911 access for all residents and staff in private communities with severe penalties for any interference, standardized state-certified emergency medical recognition and response training for all private security personnel operating in communities over a certain size, focusing on recognizing critical symptoms, facilitating EMS access, and basic life support. Strict limitations on the authority of HOA security to detain individuals or obstruct movement during perceived medical emergencies. Mandatory reporting of any incident involving delayed EMS response due to internal community protocols to Dr. Hayes' office for review. Increased state oversight and stricter licensing requirements for private security companies providing services to residential communities. The passage of Leo's law was a monumental victory for public health and safety in the state. At the bill signing ceremony, Governor Harrison specifically praised Dr. Hayes for her unwavering dedication, clinical expertise, and profound moral courage in transforming a near tragedy into a catalyst for vital, life-saving reform. Evelyn, standing beside Leo and Clara Maxwell, felt a deep sense of gratitude and accomplishment, but also a solemn awareness of the ongoing need for vigilance. The resolution of Leo's immediate crisis had rippled outwards, creating waves of positive change. Communities across the state re-evaluated their security arrangements and emergency protocols. Guardian Protection Services, or what remained of it under new management, became a case study in corporate irresponsibility and the consequences of prioritizing profit over people. Other private security firms rushed to update their training and policies to comply with the new law, recognizing that the landscape had fundamentally shifted. Dr. Evelyn Hayes continued her work as Chief State Emergency Medical Officer, her already formidable reputation enhanced by her handling of the Willow Creek crisis and her successful legislative battle. She often thought of Leo of Clara's terror, of Officer Dean's callous arrogance. Those memories fueled her determination to ensure that the systems designed to protect citizens actually did so efficiently, compassionately, and without prejudice or foolish obstruction. The sound of that child's keening cry would never fully leave her, but now it was overlaid with the stronger, more hopeful sounds of a system reformed, of a community awakened, and of a state made safer, because one person in the right place at the right time, with the right skills and the courage to act, had refused to let injustice stand. The positive duum, the lingering resonance of that victory, was in the quiet confidence that future Leos would have a better chance, that future Claras would not have to fight for their child's life against those who should have been helping. And in the world of emergency medicine, and indeed in the broader tapestry of human affairs, there were few victories more meaningful than that.